I believe I may hold the record for being the quickest new homeowner ever targeted by an HOA president drunk on power. But I absolutely hold the record for being the sole person whose HOA's president attempted to break down their door at 3 o'clock in the morning because her fictional master key wouldn't function. This tale is completely insane. So grab yourself a comfortable seat. Before we get started, leave a comment telling me your location. I'm constantly fascinated to discover how far these stories of neighborhoods battles spread. It began because I made the disastrous error of desiring a peaceful existence. The evening everything reached its climax, the evening that turned into the cornerstone of my whole counterattack, started not with a dramatic moment, but with a noise so faint it wouldn't have disturbed most individuals. But I'm not like most individuals, and my two K-9s, resting on their individual beds at the base of mine, were certainly not like most K-9s at exactly 3:17 in the morning. The gentle crunch of gravel along my driveway served as the initial domino. I was already conscious, my eyes flying open in the quiet darkness. It's a tendency you never shake. Seconds later, a deep, guttural rumble began in Ghost's chest, the German shepherd. It wasn't barking, not even growling. It was a tactical alert, a low hum that communicated, "I've identified a possible threat and await commands." Tate, the same moment, Shadow, my Belgian Malinois, raised his head, his ears rotating like radar equipment, completely soundless. He had no need to vocalize. His stance was a tensed spring of deadly capability. I slipped from bed, my actions smooth and silent. My conditioning, years worth, in locations far less comfortable than this pristine suburban neighborhood, assumed control. Pulse rate controlled, respiration measured. I approached the window, looking through a gap in the blinds. I observed it then, a shining white Range Rover positioned just beyond my property boundary under a streetlight. Its motor silent, and the silhouette compact and heavy-set, walking up my pathway with a sort of misguided certainty that only emerges from being entirely disconnected from truth. It was Brenda. Naturally, it was Brenda. I approached my entrance, verifying the stream from my high-resolution security camera through my phone. The sound activated. Brenda stood on my porch, struggling with a tiny keyring beneath the faint illumination of the porch light. She attempted one, then a different one. She muttered to herself, her tone a poisonous murmur transmitted distinctly by the delicate microphone. "Come on, you inferior piece of garbage." He likely replaced the lock. "Unauthorized alteration. That's a $200 penalty," I observed, disbelieving. This individual, the self-designated monarch of our small suburban domain, was genuinely attempting to open my front entrance in the middle of the night, when the keys predictably didn't work, because no such thing as an HOA universal key for privately owned residences exists. A reality that appeared to escape her. Her irritation overflowed. She shook the doorknob aggressively. Then she clenched her fist and pounded on the door. Not like someone requesting sugar, but with the systematic hammering intensity of a siege weapon. That's when the K-9s, authorized by a wordless hand gesture from me, were allowed to intensify. Ghost exploded in a low, thunderous sequence of barks that reverberated through the residence, the type of bark that guarantees serious physical damage. Shadow participated, his tone higher-pitched, more desperate, a frightening countermelody to Ghost's bass. On my phone display, I observed Brenda jump backward, grasping her chest. Dangerous creatures, unrestrained. I suspected it. She wailed into the darkness. But then, her expression twisting with fury, she pulled back her foot, wearing what appeared to be a very costly athletic footwear, and struck my door, forcefully. "Board President, urgent inspection." "You must allow me entry," she yelled. That was it. That was the instant her tyranny formally sealed its own fate. But to comprehend how we arrived at a 3 a.m. confrontation over an imaginary key, we must rewind 6 months. I had purchased the residence for the yard, Following 15 years as a military K-9 specialist, my active service days had concluded. My two companions, Ghost and Shadow, were likewise formally retired. They weren't merely animals. They were distinguished veterans, and I was obligated to provide them the most tranquil retirement possible. The residence was ideal, a basic single-level ranch featuring an expansive half-acre backyard enclosed by a solid 6-foot privacy barrier. It was peaceful, modest, and positioned at the terminus of a cul-de-sac, ideal for two extensively trained canines to experience their final years. Pursuing squirrels and basking on the deck, I finalized the purchase, transported my minimal possessions inside, and dedicated the initial week establishing a boundary, examining the barrier for vulnerabilities, and creating a schedule for the canines. It was paradise. The paradise endured precisely 8 days. That's when my initial interaction with Brenda occurred. I was in the front lawn collecting a loose branch that had dropped from the oak, when her white Range Rover smoothly came to a quiet halt at my curb. The window descended with a hum, and an individual who appeared perpetually detecting something foul looked out at me above designer eyewear. Her golden hair was lacquered into a configuration I could solely characterize as a battle helmet. "You're clearly the recent owner," she stated. It wasn't an inquiry. "I'm Brenda Clark, the HOA president." "Pleasant to encounter you," I responded, providing a neutral acknowledgement. "I'm Alex, I possess your welcome package here," she announced, displaying a binder that appeared approximately 4 inches in thickness. "You must review all of it right away. We maintain very elevated standards in this neighborhood, and we implement them. Your refuse containers remained observable from the road at 9 a.m. today. Pickup occurs at 7 a.m. They must be concealed by 8 a.m. I've provided you a spoken caution this occasion." I blinked. "Understood. Appreciate the notification." Just then, Shadow, who had been resting on the chilled grass beneath the porch shade, elevated his head and released a gentle woof to inform me a stranger was nearby. Brenda's eyes, enlarged by her eyewear, pivoted to him, her top lip bent somewhat. "Is that your canine?" The agent mentioned the former owner possessed a feline. "He's one of a pair," I stated peacefully. "They're retired service canines." "Well," she exhaled, her manner saturated with superiority, "you'll discover the regulations concerning animals in Section 12. Subsection C, all refuse must be removed instantly. No extreme noise, and they must be restrained constantly when beyond your property." She provided me a glance that implied she was already visualizing my canines destroying her petunia gardens. "We're not particularly a large canine neighborhood, you comprehend?" With that, she extended the absurdly thick binder through the window, compelling me to accept it, and drove away, abandoning me positioned in my personal yard, sensing like I'd just been reprimanded by an especially unpleasant drill instructor. I examined the binder. It was a maze of ridiculous regulations. The lawn couldn't exceed 3 inches elevated, but not below 2. Seasonal decorations couldn't be displayed more than 2 weeks preceding the occasion and required removal within 48 hours following. The authorized selection of entrance colors was an exciting range of beige, moderately darker beige, and taupe. It was neighborhood oppression in protected plastic pages. This, I understood, wasn't going to be the calm retirement I had pictured. It was going to be a conflict, and Brenda possessed no awareness that she was attempting to initiate a confrontation with an individual who had been expertly conditioned in how to prevail in them. The initial formal attack in Brenda's conflict against me and my canines came through certified postal service a week following our first interaction. It was a pristine envelope featuring the HOA's expertly printed heading within a violation document. The accusation, neglect to sustain lawn appearance. The proof, a blurry photograph of my backyard, evidently captured from an elevated window of the residence behind mine, displaying a single isolated canine toy. an industrial-grade black rubber Kong resting in the grass beside my deck. Based on Brenda, this represented yard debris and was an insult to the neighborhood's aesthetic unity. The penalty was $50. I gazed at the document, a cold, emotionless chuckle emerging from my mouth. This was the competition she desired to conduct. Acceptable. I remitted the $50. In conflict, occasionally you surrender a small battle to assess your adversary's approach. Her approach was meanness utilized with the crude power of legitimate appearing documentation. My counter was to advance my personal arrangements. That weekend, I established a thorough security arrangement. Not merely a doorbell camera, but for high-resolution, night vision-equipped cameras encompassing every perspective of my land. The entrance, the rear, and both flanks. They all captured continuously to a protected hard drive in my workspace with cloud duplication. If Brenda or her informants were going to observe me, I was going to observe them equally. I additionally acquired a sound meter. I anticipated the subsequent attack would concern disturbance. Predictably, 2 weeks afterward, another certified document. This occasion, a $100 penalty for extreme disturbance infractions. The grievance asserted that my canines were barking continuously at all periods, disrupting the tranquility. This was an outright fabrication. Ghost and Shadow were experts. They barked when instructed or to notify me of an authentic presence like the postal carrier or a deer at the barrier boundary. They did not bark continuously. I examined my security recordings. Throughout the previous week, the complete length of any barking from my yard totaled under 5 minutes, distributed across 7 days. Meanwhile, the small white terrier, 2 residences away, the one owned by Brenda's intimate friend, possessed a constant high-pitched yelp that commenced each time a leaf descended. I transported my fresh sound meter outside and from my boundary captured the terrier's barking. It measured a steady 85 decibels, the most intense bark I could extract from Ghost, a solitary woof upon instruction. Scarcely reached 70. I composed my initial formal counter. I created a courteous, professional document to the HOA board. I declared that I was disputing the penalty. I incorporated a record of my K-9s' behavior, synchronized with timestamps from my security recordings. I incorporated a declaration clarifying their history as extensively trained service K-9s, highlighting their reliability and control. I additionally incorporated my sound, measurements of additional environmental disturbance in the area, diplomatically excluding the location of the noisy terrier, but conveying the argument clearly. I transmitted the document along with a DVD containing the pertinent video materials through certified postal service. I desired a documentation trail for everything. This counter appeared to malfunction Brenda's reasoning. She wasn't accustomed to resistance, and definitely not systematic evidence-supported resistance. There was no penalty for 2 weeks. I assumed foolishly that she might have determined I was more difficulty than I merited. Then arrived a bulletin. It was a polished 2-page publication that typically featured captivating information about the neighborhood gardens, recent mulch, or notifications about recycling container protocol. But this one possessed a prominent headline: New Community, Safety, and Access Initiative. My circulation went somewhat frigid. I continued reading. Brenda, in her unlimited intelligence, had determined that for the protection and security of all inhabitants, the HOA required instant access to every residence in situations of crises, like a conflagration or a ruptured pipe when the resident was absent. Consequently, the board had collectively approved a fresh regulation, mandating every individual homeowner to supply a duplicate of their residence key to the HOA. The keys would be maintained in a protected lockbox supervised by Brenda personally, establishing a neighborhood universal key arrangement. She documented that adherence was compulsory and that anyone neglecting to supply a key within 30 days would be vulnerable to a daily penalty of $25 until they submitted. I examined the section twice, then a third occasion, convinced I was misinterpreting the pure, unfiltered boldness of the language on the document. She desired a key to my residence. She desired a key to everyone's residence. This wasn't merely an excessive reach. It was an astonishing jump into criminality. No HOA on earth possesses the authority to require access to the interior of a residence you individually possess. It was a stunning authority seizure, concealed under a weak pretense of protection. I recognized with complete conviction that the collective approval was her intimidating the two additional spineless board participants into acceptance. The genuine purpose she desired this authority was evident to me. It was the supreme instrument of domination. It would permit her to investigate, to examine, to torment inhabitants on an entirely fresh dimension. And for an individual like me with my history and my K-9s, the concept of Brenda Clark possessing a key to my entrance was not merely unacceptable. It was a danger I had to eliminate entirely. I promptly commenced my investigation. I wasn't merely going to combat this. I was going to deconstruct the complete basis of her jurisdiction. I visited the county courthouse and obtained the legitimate original covenants, conditions, and restrictions, C, and Rs for our subdivision, the primary document registered when the area was constructed. I positioned in my vehicle in the parking area and contrasted it section by section with the 4-inch binder of regulations Brenda had provided me. It required me 2 hours, but then I discovered it. The portion she had referenced in her bulletin, the one supposedly providing the board the authority to modify regulations for crisis access, was entirely distinct in the original document in the legitimate CC and Rs. That portion merely indicated the board could access a property's yard, not the residence, to execute essential maintenance if the homeowner neglected to do so following numerous cautions. Her adaptation, the one in my binder, had been subtly but considerably modified. The term dwelling had been inserted. It was a fabrication, a crude, conceited fabrication. She had genuinely modified the establishing legal document of our neighborhood to provide herself the authority to access our residences. This was the conclusive proof. This was what would collapse her complete domain of beige residences and groomed lawns around her, and the universal key regulation was the ideal lure to entice her into the snare I was about to establish. Armed with the understanding that Brenda was founding her authority on a deceptive document, my complete approach transformed. This was no longer about protecting against minor penalties. It was about initiating a comprehensive operation to eliminate a despot. But a frontal confrontation would be unwise. She possessed the assumed authority, and a public allegation without crushing indisputable evidence would merely appear like resentment from the individual with the aggressive K-9s. I required to construct an invincible argument. I required supporters caned, and I required to comprehend the complete extent of her misconduct. My initial destination was Dave Miller. Dave was a former accountant who resided 3 residences away. I had encountered him several occasions while exercising the K-9s on a restraint along the road as required by regulations. He was a reserved, kind individual who constantly possessed an encouraging statement. In our initial dialogue about the HOA, he'd accidentally revealed a remark. "Brenda's a genuine problem, isn't she?" That informed me he was on the proper side of justice. I visited his residence with a goodwill gesture of a 6-pack of artisan beer and my duplicate of the original county registered CC and Rs. I presented it all on his dining area table: the violation documents, the falsified regulation, the bulletin about the universal key. Dave observed attentively, his forehead creasing deeper with every document I displayed him. When I indicated the inconsistency between the legitimate CC and Rs and Brenda's adaptation, he released a prolonged, gradual whistle. "I recognized she was dishonest," he stated, shaking his head. "I just didn't realize it was this obvious fabrication of a legal document. That's not merely an HOA infraction, that's a felony." He narrated accounts of how Brenda had strengthened her authority throughout the years. She participated in the board, then expelled anyone who opposed her through an operation of focused persecution and penalties until solely her associates remained. Most inhabitants merely remitted the penalties and maintained their heads lowered to prevent the conflict. Nobody had ever contested her with genuine proof. This key regulation is the ultimate limit for numerous individuals, Dave stated, his eyes shining with a renewed intensity. They're frightened of her, but they're more frightened of her possessing a key to their residence. What do you require from me? You're an accountant, I stated. I possess a suspicion her imaginative composition isn't restricted to the regulations. The HOA is obligated to supply financial declarations to any homeowner who demands them. I'm going to demand them. When I obtain them, would you be prepared to examine? Dave smiled. Alex, there is nothing I would appreciate more than executing a forensic examination on Brenda Clark's records. Nothing. My initial supporter was obtained. The following day, I transmitted a professional, legally phrased demand through certified postal service for the previous 3 years of the HOA's complete financial documentation, incorporating comprehensive bank declarations and supplier receipts. As anticipated, Brenda obstructed. The regulations obligated her to generate the documents within 15 days. On day 14, I obtained a package containing a single-page high-level summary budget. It was worthless, displaying general categories like landscaping, $40,000, and administrative fees, $15,000, with no specifics. It was an intentional act of defiance. This was precisely what I had predicted. I had my attorney compose a much more severe document referencing the particular state regulation that controlled HOA openness and the consequences for defiance, which incorporated individual accountability for board participants. The document indicated that if the complete unrestricted records were not supplied within 7 business days, we would submit a petition with the court to mandate their disclosure and would pursue to have the board participants held individually liable for all legal expenses that obtained their focus. 6 days afterward, a large, reluctantly assembled box came at my entrance. It was 3 years of chaotic, inadequately duplicated financial documentation. It was a disaster, likely by intention, designed to frighten and perplex. But for an individual like Dave, it was a treasure chart for the following week. Dave's dining area transformed into our command center. He distributed the documents out, equipped with a calculator, a ruler, and a container of black coffee. I functioned as his assistant, arranging documents and comparing names and dates. It didn't require long for the sequence to surface. The landscaping expenses were ridiculously exaggerated. The pool maintenance organization appeared to be invoicing triple the market rate. But the genuine treasure was in the administrative and consulting expenses. There was a repeating monthly transaction ranging from $500 to as high as $2,000, directed to an organization called Suburban Solutions, LLC. I never learned of them, Dave muttered, noting on his notepad. There's no agreement in here, no scope of service, merely receipts. And observe this receipt. He displayed one. It was incredibly vague. For consulting services provided. That's all it indicated. This is typical shell organization conduct. While Dave investigated the figures, I acquired the organization name and proceeded to function online. I executed a search through the state's public registry of registered businesses, and there it existed. Suburban Solutions, LLC. Registered representative and exclusive officer, Brenda Clark. The location specified for the enterprise was a P.O. Box, K, in the adjacent town. She was compensating herself. She was utilizing our HOA contributions to compensate herself a concealed, unapproved income for consulting. It's concealing the funds through a shell organization she managed. Throughout 3 years, Dave determined she had compensated her personal organization more than $80,000. We possessed it all. Fabrication, postal deception, by transmitting the deceptive requirements through the postal system. And now, evident embezzlement. The universal key regulation wasn't merely about authority. It was a method to solidify her domination and prevent anyone from ever approaching close enough to expose her financial offenses. She was a trapped creature, and her irrational requirement for our keys was her reacting, attempting to reestablish the superiority she sensed diminishing. All I had to accomplish was permit her to assume she was succeeding. K permitted the 30-day deadline for the key regulation to elapse. On day 31, as anticipated, another certified document arrived, a penalty for $25 for defiance. I disregarded it. Day 32, another one. Day 33, another. She was documenting my file, constructing her argument for whatever discipline she was scheming. But every document she transmitted was another fragment of proof for me. It was another spike she was pounding into her personal casket. The tension was accumulating. I recognized she would ultimately break. I merely had to be prepared when she did. The weeks preceding the 3 a.m. occurrence were an instruction in mental combat. Brenda was intensifying K, and I was countering with an approach she couldn't grasp. K composed surgical exactness. For every penalty she generated for my defiance with the criminal universal key regulation, I transmitted a courteous, professional email back to the complete board, not merely her. In each email, I merely declared, I am in possession of your notification dated date. As this regulation is founded on a clause not existing in a legitimate county-registered CC&Rs and is an immediate infraction of state property statute, I am lawfully incapable to submit. All rights preserved. Connected a scan of the pertinent section from the county document to every individual email. I was establishing an irrefutable record that the complete board was conscious of the criminality of their behaviors. Brenda's counters, which I could determine she was composing herself, despite originating from the standard HOA board email location, became progressively unstable. They progressed from professional to insisting, too openly intimidating. One email alleged me of jeopardizing the complete neighborhood and cautioned of extreme penalties, incorporating, positioning a lien on my land. All of this was digital treasure, preserved and duplicated in triplicate. She was so obscured by her fury at my rebellion that she didn't understand she was providing me the rope to execute her with. The shattering moment. The trigger for her midnight appearance was my concluding professional document. Following consultation with my attorney, we determined it was opportunity to position her in checkmate. We composed a cease and desist document. It was an exquisite piece of legal composition. It presented in excruciating specifics every individual one of her violations. It referenced the fabrication of the CC&Rs, citing the legitimate county document identifier. It described the criminality of the universal key regulation under state statute. It mentioned her operation of persecution and the catalog of groundless penalties. And for the concluding element, it indicated that we possessed serious apprehensions about financial mishandling and probable misconduct by the board, and that we were professionally requesting a third-party forensic examination of all HOA finances to be decided on at the subsequent General Assembly. We transmitted this document through certified postal service to Brenda and additionally to the 2 additional board participants, a timid individual named Carol and a former golf enthusiast named Gary, at their residence locations. This was a vital action. It prevented Brenda from capturing the documents and asserting she was managing it. It compelled Carol and Gary to recognize without a trace of uncertainty the complete extent of what they were involved in. It was an announcement of conflict, and it transmitted Brenda beyond the boundary. I recognized she would counter adversely. I just didn't anticipate a complete frontal attack on my entrance, which returns us to that evening, 3:17 a.m., as I positioned in my shadowed corridor, observing on my phone as Brenda struck my entrance and wailed about her crisis examination. My K-9s, going frantic behind the entrance. I sensed a peculiar sense of tranquility. This was it, the concluding, indisputable fragment of proof, her complete and absolute collapse. Captured in high-resolution video and sound, she was no longer merely an intimidator with a binder. She was a felon attempting to compel access into a personal dwelling. My procedure was elementary. I didn't interact with her. I didn't yell through the entrance. I merely contacted 911. I maintained my tone steady. Yes. My name is Alex. My location is 123 Dogwood Lane. There is an individual, my HOA president, on my entrance porch, attempting to compel access into my residence. She is striking the entrance and yelling. Yes, she's still there. No, I am not in instant jeopardy. The entrance is protected, but she is evidently unstable in executing a felony. I ensured to utilize a particular legalistic terminology, attempting to compel access, unstable. I additionally added, "Ma'am, for the officer's awareness, I am a former military K-9 specialist. I possess 2 trained K-9s south in the residence. They are restrained, but the individual's behaviors are disturbing them. The circumstance requires to be diminished." It required the police approximately 4 minutes to come. The noise of a siren wailing down our tranquil suburban road was evidently sufficient to extract Brenda from her fury. On my camera stream, I observed her eyes expand with fear. She hurried back to her Range Rover and departed rapidly. Just as the initial patrol vehicle turned onto our Cole-D-SAC, 2 officers, a male and a female, approached my entrance carefully. I opened it, my hands observable, and emerged onto the porch. Ghost and Shadow were behind me in the entrance, positioned perfectly motionless and soundless on my instruction. Their appearance was commanding, but their control was apparent. "She's departed," I stated to the officers. "Escaped as soon as she detected you approaching, but I possess it all on video." I welcomed them in and displayed the recordings for them on my living area television. They observed, their countenances transforming from disinterested doubt to authentic astonishment. They observed her attempting the keys. They detected her muttering about criminal lock replacements. They observed her pound, then strike the entrance. They detected her yell about her jurisdiction. The female officer merely shook her head. "Okay," she stated. "This is not a typical HOA controversy." The male officer, whose identification tag indicated Sergeant Miller, gazed at Ghost and Shadow with a recognizing eye. "Military?" he inquired. "Sir," I responded. "Sure years." These 2 were my companions. His manner transformed. It was a minor element, a transition from civilian officer to veteran. "She's fortunate that entrance is sturdy," he stated, gesturing toward it. "She possesses no awareness of the jeopardy she positioned herself in." "I recognize," I stated. "That's portion of the difficulty. She's entirely separated from truth." They acquired my complete declaration. They acquired a duplicate of the video material. They registered in legitimate police documentation for attempted illegal access and destruction, documenting the marks from her costly footwear on my recently painted and HOA authorized taupe entrance. The documentation was the concluding foundation in the basis of my argument. With this, I wasn't merely an irritated homeowner anymore. I was the casualty of a recorded felony. The following morning, equipped with the police documentation identifier, I commenced the concluding stage of the strategy. Through my attorney, I transmitted a professional notification to all 120 homeowners in our neighborhood, invoking a provision in the authentic CC and Rs that permitted inhabitants to summon an in-crisis assembly with the signatures of 25% of the homeowners, Dave, and I had dedicated the preceding week discreetly collecting those signatures from neighbors exhausted with the universal key regulation. The notification was elementary. It summoned an crisis assembly in the neighborhood clubhouse in 1 week's duration. The agenda element was specified as a review of a significant security occurrence and a ballot of no assurance in the present HOA Board of Directors. Brenda couldn't prevent it. The assembly was legitimate. She was advancing into a snare of her personal creation, and I was going to ensure every individual one of her neighbors possessed a foremost row position for the V explosion. The evening of the crisis assembly, the neighborhood clubhouse was vibrating with an intensity it hadn't witnessed since the Christmas gathering. Nearly every household was represented. Individuals were compressed into the inexpensive folding seats, positioned along the barriers, their countenances a combination of interest, frustration, and anxiety. This was it. The public forum, the location where Brenda's tyranny would either be conclusively terminated or improbably validated. I sensed the recognizable pre-operation stress, a low vibration of adrenaline that enhanced my concentration. Dot provided me a firm acknowledgement from the foremost row where he'd preserved me a position. He possessed an organized collection of financial summaries, prepared to proceed. Brenda came, accompanied by her two dedicated board participants, Carol and Gary. She entered into the space like a sovereign accessing her tribunal, attired in a precise cream-colored pants outfit that likely exceeded my monthly mortgage compensation. She transported a leather-bound portfolio and displayed an countenance of ultimate assurance, combined with frustration. She evidently assumed this was a minor rebellion she could suppress with a severe tongue and several condescending statements. She entirely misjudged her neighbors, and more significantly, she entirely misjudged me. She acquired the platform and struck a compact gavel. "All right, let's conclude this foolishness," she commenced, her tone saturated with contempt. "Comprehend, a particular inhabitant, recent to our neighborhood and evidently unfamiliar with how refined individuals coexist, has provoked some groundless apprehensions." She didn't utilize my name, but every eye in the space shifted to me. He possesses a difficulty with regulations. He possesses a difficulty with protection. He maintains hazardous, hostile creatures and declines to submit with fundamental security procedures that are for his personal benefit. She proceeded for 5 minutes, an outburst of fabrications and partial truths, characterizing me as an isolated problem creator who was a danger to the area's perfect tranquility. When she ultimately concluded, respiring intensely, she stared at me. "Do you possess anything to declare for yourself before we ballot to reject this absurd assembly?" "I do," I stated, my tone composed and uniform. I advanced to the foremost of the space where I had already established a projector and a laptop. "Thank you for that presentation, Brenda. I won't require 5 minutes. I merely require to display everyone's several documents in a brief video." A whisper progressed through the assembly. Brenda's eyes constricted. This wasn't on her outline. I activated the initial slide onto the display. It was a adjacent comparison. On the left was a high-resolution scan of the legitimate CC and Rs registered with the county. On the right was a scan of the identical section from the welcome binder she circulated. I utilized a digital red marker to encircle the pertinent section in both. "As you can observe," I stated, utilizing a laser indicator, "the legitimate, lawfully binding document provides the board jurisdiction to access your yard for maintenance. The document President Clark circulates has been modified to incorporate the term dwelling. This is the foundation for her universal key regulation. It is, to be direct, a fabrication." Gasps traveled through the space. Brenda became ashen. That's an error. "A clerical mistake," she stammered. "A clerical mistake that conveniently provides you the extraordinary and criminal authority to access our residences?" I inquired rhetorically. I activated to the subsequent slide, which transports me to the finances. I gestured to Dave. He elevated. "As a former CPA and a homeowner here," Dave stated, his tone controlled and commanding, "I examined the financial documentation that the board was lawfully obligated to surrender. For 3 years, we have been compensating thousands of dollars monthly to a supplier called Suburban Solutions, KLLC, for consulting services. These compensations total over $80,000. He's suspended for impact. What President Clark neglected to reveal is that she is the exclusive proprietor and officer of that organization. The space exploded. Individuals were on their bases, yelling inquiries. "You're compensating yourself with our funds." Someone yelled from the rear. Brenda was immobilized, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Gary and Carol appeared like they desired the floor to consume them completely. "And ultimately," I stated, my tone penetrating through the disturbance, "the significant security occurrence referenced in the assembly notification." I activated play of the video material. The grainy time-stamped recordings of my entrance porch at 3:17 a.m. occupied the large display. The complete neighborhood observed in astonished quietness as their HOA president struggled with keys, shook the doorknob, and then commenced striking my entrance. Her countenance a cover of pure fury. Her wails about crisis examinations resonating through the clubhouse when the video terminated with her frightened withdrawal from the noise of police sirens. Here was a deceased quietness in the space. Nobody recognized what to declare. I permitted the quietness to suspend for an instant. Then I stated, "This is not about lawn appearance or refused containers. This is about methodical abuse of authority, financial misconduct, and criminal conduct. The police documentation for this occurrence is a subject of public documentation." I gazed directly at Brenda. Her countenance was colorless. The cream-colored pants outfit suddenly appeared inexpensive and inadequate. The sovereign's authority had disappeared. She was merely an individual in the space occupied of individuals. Now recognized precisely who she was. The ballot of no assurance was instant and collective. Not even Carol and Gary ventured to ballot in her benefit. They were both eliminated from the board along with her. Dave was instantly designated to direct a temporary transition board to organize the disorder. Brenda, without another statement, rotated and escaped the clubhouse, her spouse trailing behind her like a struck K-9. The consequences was rapid and gratifying. The fresh board, directed by Dave, employed an expert forensic accounting organization. The concluding calculation of Brenda's embezzlement was closer to $95,000. They exposed all the exaggerated receipts and bribes. The county district prosecutor, presented with our thoroughly arranged file of proof of fabrication, the financial documentation, the police documentation, the video-registered criminal accusations. Brenda was confronting counts of embezzlement, wire deception, and fabrication to compensate for her legal protection and the court-mandated compensation. She had to dispose the white Range Rover 6 months afterward, under the shadow of humiliation and approaching legal destruction. She and her spouse disposed their residence for a deficit and vanished. Our neighborhood recovered. The HOA was reorganized. The regulations were recomposed to be elementary, equitable, and most significantly, legitimate. The 4-inch binder was substituted with a reasonable 10-page pamphlet. Dave transformed into the permanent treasurer, and the board transformed into a collection of sensible individuals concentrated on genuine neighborhood requirements, not on measuring the elevation of their neighbors. Lawn, my existence, ultimately discovered the tranquility I'd been pursuing. Ghost and Shadow dedicated their days basking on the deck, their boundary protected. Occasionally, I would observe them, these two devoted companions who had experienced so much with me, and I'd contemplate the peculiar, quiet conflict we had contested, and prevailed right here in our personal backyard. It demonstrates the fundamentals are the identical everywhere. Maintain your position, collect your intelligence. Can never, ever misjudge your adversary's capability for self-annihilation. And beyond everything, recognize that when you contest for what's correct, you're never genuinely contesting alone.